For those of you who aren't aware, there's a war going on in the Middle East currently. Probably have heard of it on the news. As a result of that war, we have seen a huge uptick in Iranian IO targeting Israel. There's been a lot of regular IO, for lack of a better word. That includes primarily social media or domain-centric operations that I've written about in my blog, Medic Warfare, Dofek TV, Israel in a Minute. Recorded Future has done a lot of work on Emerald Divide, a Telegram and WhatsApp-centric network. And there's also been a fair amount of physical IO. That includes, for example, sending flowers to Israeli hostage families, carrying out physical acts of sabotage in the streets, putting up political posters. But what's been so interesting about this conflict is the prevalence of cyber-enabled IO. Most of that activity is Telegram-centric hacktivist fronts. They carry out low-level operations, DDoSing Israeli organizations, defacing domains, posting breach data, that sort of thing. We can see the huge uptick here in activity from Microsoft, who, by the way, does a fantastic job tracking all of this. All you need to do is look at this graph, it's self-explanatory. 2023 onwards, there's an explosion of hacktivist activity. But something that I noticed a while back was a specific type of activity, a cluster that was higher investment and worth investigating. That new cluster of hack and leaks actually began prior to the war in late 2023, and we can see 4 of the operations here. We're not going to be able to cover all of the total operations of this. Talk to me afterwards if you want. And then several weeks after I actually submitted to CyberWARCON, the FBI, Department of Treasury, and the Israel National Cyber Directorate finally attributed this cluster to Eminat Pasargad, now known as Arya Separayan Desazan. That group was the one responsible for the US election interference from Iran, the Proud Boys emails, the Enemies of the People doxing site, and more. What I'm going to show in this presentation is that even without the advisory, we can still weakly attribute this to Iran and arguably to ASA also as well by looking at new TTPs, behavior, and so on in this cluster of activity. So it all begins where else but Sweden in 2023, when Swedish extremists began burning Qurans in the street due to domestic political unrest. In July of 2023, we then see a new hacktivist front be born called AnzuTeams. They set up clear and onion domains that we can see here, a lot of religious language and imagery, and of course a Telegram channel where they dox the Swedes involved in burning the Qurans. They also compromised a Swedish telecommunications firm and sent out over 15,000 SMSs to Swedes. We can see the example there in the upper right-hand corner. They made the very interesting and indicative choice of choosing Lebanese Secretary General al-Hizballah Hassan Nasrallah, which is not the person that the average person would choose to appeal to global Islam, to say the least. And here they ask, in fact, that people that receive these texts work to revenge the name of Islam in Sweden and abroad. Microsoft, to zero fanfare in an infographic, attributed this in February 2024 to Iran. And then Sweden attributed it months later to the IRGC, which is when it finally began making headlines. Now, the infrastructure of the site is where it gets interesting, and this is how we can begin to cluster the activity. Firstly, on the domain, they have a domain file upload section where you can essentially upload your own content. They will ask your name, your email address, and they want you to then upload content to then dox the individuals involved in burning those Qurans. Useful for content, also, of course, for potential later recruitment, and as well as part of being a front. One of their VPSs was used on Stark Industries, which is another key trend we see in Iranian activity recently, the use of Russian hosting infrastructure, Stark in particular, but others. And we also had multiple backup domains on different TLDs on the same host. So we see onzuteam.live, .team, .info, .org as well. Pre-positioned backups is a key TTP here. There are some other domains that we're going to look at in this as well. I'm sorry, some other characteristics for this domain. That includes the use of an IP logger pixel, and shout out to URL scan for that. You can see it in the third row from the bottom there. 1RGOB4 is the IP logger pixel they have integrated into the domain. They request crypto for donations as part of being a front. They have a Telegram bot with an exposed token, which Redditors then took over and then, of course, vandalized online. And they, of course, have an onion domain, another key tribute here. The next operation in April of 2024 is the first targeting Israel, and that is the Cyber Court. So the Cyber Court is a coalition of hacktivist groups. They set up their domain and Telegram channel. This is already months into the ongoing war that we see. And in that group, on that domain, they issue verdicts accusing a given company or organization of being guilty of crimes, usually involving the war. And then the member groups attack. Some of these groups are well known. We have Anonymous Sudan, apparently. We have Cyber Avengers. We have Handala. Many of these are Iran Nexus actors, let's say. But others were created just for this operation. Groups like Maghreb and Nasser, Net-Hunter, and Anonymous South Africa, for example, were created probably just for this operation by ASA. The last message date for most of these was, in fact, April 4th, and therefore we can also assume that as well. This is also the one operation that used an AI-generated image for their logo. On the domain, we, of course, see a tracking pixel. You can see that below. They also are very proud of utilizing Web3. They claim to be the first cyber group to start their actions in Web3 and tell people to download Brave, so they're doing the Lord's work there. They're very proud about that. We also have the easiest, well, not easiest, an easy census query over here of an e-tag response from the HTTP response of one of their servers, shows that exposes another host, and that host is also hosted past Iranian domains as well. Many of the hosts in this cluster of activity have past ties to Iran and have hosted Iranian domains in the past, so they're probably recycling infrastructure they've already had. Shortly after the actual operation began, it was amplified by Iranian state media, including in Hebrew, literally hours to maybe a day or so after the operation began, which shows some degree of planning and coordination. I can only imagine how many Hebrew speakers they have working for them to get this ready to go. The next operation, only 2 months after, is zeusistalking in July of 2024. zeusistalking, a new hacktivist run, pops the Israeli Olympic Sports Commission and then leaks the travel accommodation information and PII of that delegation to the domain as well as to their Telegram channel. As you can see in the image below in the upper left-hand corner, they even made it into a graph because graphic design is clearly their passion. They have, alongside their domain, they have Telegram channels, multiple backups pre-positioned, a Facebook page that Meta took down pretty quickly, a Twitter channel, and of course, an Onion domain. They were attributed by the INCD, the Israel National Cyber Directorate, to Iran, maybe a week or two after the operation began. On the same host, they had a .com and .net domain as a backup, and you could easily de-anonymize the Onion domain just by searching it in census. I was kind of disappointed. I wanted there to be a bit of a better query to write there, but unfortunately, it was just the easiest thing in the world to do, to then find the actual host IP. And obviously, they have an IP logger pixel integrated in there as well. They too have, this is an interesting case because they actually parroted narratives on Iranian state outlets from that same day. In this case, the narrative being that Israeli athletes are in fact military personnel and still active military and so on. And additionally, zeusistalking was amplified by Iranian state media via Hispan TV, their Spanish language outlet, just 12 hours after the creation of the Telegram channel. The domain is back up. They're very persistent at .io domain. They still have multiple backup Telegram channels. Telegram keeps taking them down and they keep coming back up. And then interestingly enough, in one retroactive verdict for the Cyber Court actually claims that zeusistalking popped the Israeli Olympic Sports Commission as per the Cyber Court's verdict. So we have some sort of collaboration there also as well. A concurrent operation targeting the Olympic delegation was RGUD France. This is the only true false flag operation. All the others are hacktivist fronts. This is a case where they assume the identity of a now defunct French far-right group. They utilize, like zeusistalking, a .com and .net domain, as well as an Onion domain. They, of course, set up a Telegram channel, Facebook page, and Twitter. You might be seeing a pattern here. And they also, interestingly, sent out SMSs to people in France and abroad, inviting them to attend the funeral of an Israeli athlete. That funeral, of course, was false. But if you click the link below to get the location, which they didn't even bother hiding in this case, you can see that it'll take you to a PNG file of blood. So pretty brutish and unsophisticated there, to say the least. They should have at least used URL shortener. They also targeted Israeli athletes directly, sending them threatening emails, and this was also, of course, attributed by the INCD to Iran shortly thereafterwards. The domain, similarly to the AnzuTeam and all the other domains that we've seen here, has a tracking pixel integrated. There are multiple specific cases of Iranian suspicious XYZ and other domains hosted on the host historically. The current host is a Russian provider, which is also a trend that we see in this operation, and they also invited visitors to the site to share information to then receive money like the AnzuTeam. So let's quickly review the infrastructure over here and the shared TTPs and see where we go from there. Web3 and Onion hosting are universal. Only one uses Web3, but all of them utilize Onion hosting. The majority of their non-commercial hosting infra has past ties to Iran, having hosted past Iranian domains. In many cases, they also utilize the same DNS service, SSLIP, if you look back in the past DNS records. Many of them currently utilize Russian hosting, presumably because they can't maintain or achieve access with Western hosting firms. They all utilize IP logger tracking, primarily but not exclusively from IP logger. They have their backup infrastructure pre-positioned, meaning they are well prepared for any operation here with at least 4 or 5 backup domains, Telegram channels, whatever they happen to need prior and ready to go. They're still, as we know from past activity as well, partial to the use of SMSs and emails as part of their operations. There are a bunch of other behaviors that we won't have time to get into in depth, like seeding on hacking forums and so on. They all have a similar narrative, calling for revenge against alleged crimes against Islam, usually Israeli, but not exclusively. The use of hacktivists and false flag fronts is also a big TTP for ASA, as we know historically as well. They're also very active in contacting visitors to the domain. They utilize forums and upload files. They want people to engage with their content, at least they appear that way. There's a lot of coverage in Iranian state media, and they have a high operational tempo and very low emphasis on OPSEC. They don't really care about it. You can find slip-ups everywhere, Persian in the source code, whatever you want. And they target essentially the same victims, at least since the war, following the Swedish attack. Primarily Israeli ministries, the Israeli Ministry of Social Security, Israeli Ministry of Defense, and many others, usually targeting web-facing, internet-facing web servers and portals and so on, and of course, any tied to those operationally as well. So some findings then on ASA. I think the main findings here are that things that we already knew partially at the very least, that they have a high-risk appetite, they are incredibly persistent, they don't mind being exposed. They still have difficulty maintaining access to VPS providers, which is why, according to the advisory, they set up their own VPS firms. Fascinating, you should read about it. They had 2 front companies they utilized. And they're also increasingly pivoting to utilizing Russian hosting firms as well. They're very much into the onion hosting. I believe that's for 2 reasons. Firstly, to avoid takedowns having the server be ID'd, but also because it's a cool hacktivist thing to do, and that's what they like to do nowadays for the most part, although they do it poorly. The pre-positioned backups are also a big one, and whenever you look at their activity, we should be keeping that in mind. They have multiple backups on many, many platforms and domains as well to look for. And the tracking pixels. I guess they still need to hit their KPIs, don't we all? And they don't want to integrate Google platforms or other tooling as well to maintain user metrics. Now, I think the most interesting part also as well was that they were expected by Microsoft and many others to target the US elections. They did it in the past. They didn't really do it this time. That could be the result of potentially US government action against them. We did see that some of the domains were seized maybe a week or 2 prior to the actual elections. Personally, I believe that it's a result of them simply being overly focused on Israel and the ongoing war, but we'll see there for more. There's a lot more to cover here, so thank you for listening, and if you want to talk more, catch me afterwards. Thank you, guys.